Are your relationships contributing to your burnout? This is an excellent question that I think everyone should ask themselves. And so I'm really excited to dive into it. But first, I just want to introduce myself real quick. My name is Allison Borstad. I'm a life design coach for highly sensitive, high achieving women. And essentially, what I do is help women who tend to fall into overwhelm and exhaustion and overgiving. And I help them learn to balance their energy, learn to focus their intention, and learn to say no, to stop people pleasing, to prioritize their needs, to prioritize rest, and find ways to do this where you can continue to increase your income, your impact, your joy, your ease, all these things that you can continue to grow in your life and your career while resting more and playing more and feeling better. So we assess all areas of life when we do this kind of work together. Life design truly is kind of where your home life meets your work life or your purpose. We kind of combine it all together of how can we make this a seamless, beautiful, flowy, lush life for you. And one of the big areas I really like to look at is relationships because I think they may actually be one of the biggest contributors to burnout. So it's really important that we start to look at our relationships and see, are we in balanced in reciprocal relationships or are we in imbalanced relationships? A lot of us start out in these, and my goal is to help people find a way to balance the scales. So let's dive right in. So, why do highly empathetic, highly compassionate, high achieving people tend to end up in codependent relationships where they tend to be the overgiver in their relationships, where they're giving way more than they're receiving back from people? There's a lot of reasons why. We could get into this. Some of it might be a little bit more like trauma related. I am a therapist by trade, by the way, so I'm very trauma informed. I go into this with a lot of my clients of, were you raised in an environment or in a way that set you up to feel like you needed to be hyper independent, where you had to make sure that your own needs were met, and or that you had to meet the needs of other people over your own? Maybe you were having to be a caretaker to other siblings or your parents, or you just kind of learned to be perfect, have all your own needs met, and then you were so resourceful that other people were like, well, you figured it out, help me. So you look like a natural leader because you're being independent, you're being resourceful, you're being resilient, and that attracts people who need help. Sometimes needy people who don't even want to do the work. They want you to do the work for them. We call these social loafers. It's an official term in psychology, which I think is kind of hilarious. But there are some people who would really like to coast and float, and they would love to find somebody to do all the work. Trust me, if you've ever done a group project or like worked on a team, you know these people exist. My guess is if you're watching this video, you are not one of them. You were the person that was like the point person leading the team, right? And making sure that everything got done. So again, these highly capable, highly caring people, because you're so capable and because it feels good to be good at what you do and to help people and to see kind of the tangible benefits of your helping, there's part of that kind of scratches our own ego a little bit, or just simply feels good because we like to help other people. That's part of our purpose. We want to be here to help the world be a better place, to leave it better than we found it. So a lot of this comes from a really good-hearted place of like, I like being helpful, or because I can be helpful, I feel like I should. But there's a dark side to all this. And we're going to get deeper into this. So essentially, for you to truly be healthy personally, like not getting into burnout, not being totally exhausted, you really do have to have reciprocal relationships all around you. And you need to be very choosy about who you spend your time with. Not everyone should have access to you and your time. And we'll get into this more in a second, but I'm not saying that you need to be rude to anyone or just cut all these people off, but I think you need to be really mindful of where you're spending your time and energy, and you are allowed to be choosy with who you open up yourself to, especially if you identify as a highly sensitive person or an empath, where you feel like you kind of absorb the energies of other people. Then you have to be extra choosy, because there are some people who might be stuck in a really low state or an anxious state or something that every time you're with them, it's like contagious. You're going to absorb and catch some of that energy. So This is something that you need to start to really cue into your body, because your body is very wise. And one thing I have found with people who might identify as people pleasers, or people who put themselves last and put everybody else first, is they get so conditioned to accommodating other people before them at all cost that you systematically learn to ignore your body and your cues. So someone says something that makes you uncomfortable and you don't speak up or say anything because you don't want the conflict, or you don't want to offend them or hurt their feelings. And so you just keep it to yourself, even though you're maybe stewing or not feeling good. Or maybe, someone is like not leaving your house after a party and you're just like nodding and talking to them when you're like, I'm so tired and I just, like you feel uncomfortable. I want to go sit down. I want to go do something. But no, you stay there to be polite and you just keep nodding and nodding as they talk on and on and on. Right. So a lot of us do these kind of behaviors, and we get to a point where we've ignored our body's cues for so long that I don't know, we hardly register them anymore. And a big part of me helping people connect to their true desires, their true purpose, what they're really supposed to be doing, their intuition, all of these things, I believe a lot of that wisdom lies within our body, because our brains can intellectualize anything. We can go into all sorts of rabbit holes of thought trying to figure things out in our life. But sometimes when we just drop into our body and ask, how do I feel? What am I leaning towards? What's going on? We can actually get a lot of, I think, very wise, essential, simple information that we need to know. So getting into this slide here, essentially, as we do this work, I think it's really helpful to just start with the awareness of, how do I feel around certain people? Now, there are some that you already know without even doing this work of like, oh, that person. Anytime they call or text me, oh my gosh, do I want to answer? Right. And right there's a whole body response of, oh, let me lean away. Let me like, either hunch over or like whatever. We can have like very visceral responses to certain people. Notice those, because a lot of times these visceral responses are your inner wisdom, your inner powerhouse saying, these people violate my boundaries and I don't like them. Or some of these people are just, they're so draining and exhausting, and I only have so much energy to give in general. Doing this at work, or I got kids, or I got, like we all have so much going on that there are some people that are like, I do not have the time or energy to pour into this relationship, especially if it's not pouring back into me. It's not selfish for you to want things to be equal. It's selfish if you want someone to do everything for you and placate you at their expense. That's what selfish is. But wanting equality is healthy. And we need to push for it, because there's some people who will take and take and take as long as we let them. So my goal is for people to start balancing the scales. But first we have to know, who do I feel good around and who do I not feel good around? Point blank. Because that tells us so much information about what I think who we are really meant to be with. And so I have this fun little continuum here that I'm sure you've been looking at, this drain to radiator continuum. And kind of funny story. This is based on a conversation I had when I was traveling in Ireland. I was sitting on a bus bench waiting for a bus. And there was this old man next to me who was like giving me advice about life, just chatting me up. And he was like, you need to know there are two types of people in this world, a radiator and a drain. And he like goes into it. And he was very like either or, like either some people are just there to suck you dry of your energy, and there's some people who are there to like light you up and just boost you on your way. And the more that I thought about it, I'm like, I think there's a continuum. I think there's wisdom to this, because there are some people, maybe it's your best friend or someone where you get together, even if you're both in grouchy moods when you meet, like you're elevated. As soon as you're together, you're like, yes, it's you. Like, I love you. This is great. And you can be venting or whatever, but then cackling and laughing, and like you feel elevated and better after you're with these people. To me, those are your people. There's a natural click. You kind of get each other. You feel inspired. You feel really lit up. And sometimes these relationships are rare or hard to find. I talk to some people who don't have any of these people in their lives, and I'm like, time to go on a mission to find these people. We can make friends at any age, find communities where there's like-minded souls, where you're going to find someone who's going to root you on like this. I'm in my mid-30s, and I got to tell you, in my last 4 years of really diving into this business, I've made so many new friends and incredible radiators in my life. So it is possible at any point to make these friends. Okay, the other end of the spectrum here, the drains. There are just some people that you just feel so exhausted or just so annoyed or offended or sad, right? You're just like, oh, every time I hang out with Aunt so and so, I feel terrible about myself. She says all these little things, or she implies the stuff, or she's passive aggressive, or I'm trying to understand what's going on. It's just exhausting. It is work to hang out with that person. Notice that. So as you kind of sort people into these categories, and then there's some people who are neutral, which is great. Like, and honestly, probably most people fall into the neutral category, which is perfect. And those people, it's fine. I mean, we always want to maximize more time and more, I don't know, interaction with these radiator folks. Like, we always want to increase that because that does really feed your soul. And we do want to minimize the spending time with the drain folks. And we're going to get right into that. And again, I'm not trying to be pejorative towards the people that we're putting in the drain category. It's not really that that person is a drain point blank. Maybe they're a radiator for someone else, but with you, I don't know, it's not working. All right. So it's more of you just like noticing what your energy is doing more than us like labeling anyone in any kind of negative way, if that makes sense. So this is where I'm going to go a little deeper into this concept of like, what is making you feel so drained around these people? And my thought on it is there's kind of like these two categories of either you're simply not compatible with this person. Maybe they're an amazing person and like I just said, a radiator to other people, but there's something about you two together that is just like, this doesn't work. So like maybe having drastically different values, you're like, we are never going to see eye to eye. It's exhausting for us to try to get on the same page. We have different senses of humor, or I don't know, there's something about their energy that I can't handle it. If you're an empath, or if you're kind of on a healing journey, healing some childhood trauma, if you've ever had people around you growing up that were either hyper anxious or hyper depressed or overly angry or something, there might be certain people that you interact with that are a little too reminiscent of some of these people in your life that may have contributed to trauma in your life. And so sometimes these are the people where you're like, I can't be around them. It's triggering. It's upsetting to me. I need to, do my inner work on this, but I also don't have to force myself to be around someone I don't particularly like or someone who's not really feeding into me. And maybe this goes against the way that we're socialized, when we're in school, when we're children, we're supposed to get along with everybody. And I think to some degree that's true. I do think we need to be kind and generous and in general, putting really good energy out there to everyone. And at the same time, being focused though about like how much time and access and energy. So if you're bumping into people, it's like, yes, hello, politeness. I'm not going to give any mean or negative energy at anyone here. But also I don't have to give everyone all of my time and attention. I can self-direct and be very intentional about how I spend my time. So this is the whole thing of like, we're not meant to click with everybody. If someone doesn't like you, you don't like them. It can actually be a neutral thing without anyone having to be the villain. Maybe you're just incompatible. But now we're going to get a little deeper into this concept of energy vampires. You may or may not have heard this before. It's become a little bit more of a buzzword of there's just certain people where it almost feels intentional that they're like draining your life force or like siphoning your energy for them to then use. The classic kind of example is a narcissist. Oftentimes narcissists are attracted to empaths or highly compassionate, highly sensitive people, very generous, loving people, because they're like, ooh, I can just siphon off of this person to boost my self-esteem and to do my chores for me and to do all like, I mean, truly, they just capitalize on your energy and your labor and they know what they're doing. Now, not all energy vampires are that way, but a lot of times there is some degree of narcissistic or highly selfish traits. So obviously everyone is not a narcissist. We throw that word around a little bit too often, but there are kind of narcissistic traits of someone who is so self-absorbed and just only concerned about having their own needs met and not very conscientious towards other people. And oftentimes energy vampires actively either avoid your cues or your gentle boundaries of like, okay, like ready to go. Or sometimes they see it and they keep pushing your boundaries. Maybe you're saying no and they're pushing past them. These are the people that we're going to get into. We got to set big boundaries with these people. It's not okay. It is not okay. I, was a therapist for 10 years, and I have worked with individuals and couples, and I've even worked with the actual energy vampire people. And unless they really shift their mindsets drastically, sometimes therapy doesn't work because they're really motivated and just finding people to kind of leech off of. And I'm going to show you all the ways that they do this here. So these are some of the tendencies of a true energy vampire. Now, again, there's some people that like drain you a little bit or whatever. And then there are some people that are deeply problematic in these ways. So, they might be constantly looking to you to boost their self-esteem. They're not going to do it for themselves. They need you to do it. And then if you don't do it for them, they're mad. They might always have drama going on. They blame everything else. Everything in their life is not their fault. It's something out here is victimizing me, or this is happening, or I have no control over this. Why does this always happen to me? A lot of times they lack insight, or if people try to give them feedback, they're just like, no, you're wrong, or you're the villain here, and you're bullying me when someone is calling them out on problematic behavior. And again, they love to target really generous and empathetic people. So a lot of times other people who don't put up with the stuff, people who have good boundaries, like see them and they're like, nope. And so a lot of times they'll like go on to the next of where can I find someone who is endlessly forgiving, even when I'm engaging in problematic behavior. And my thought is it's really not helpful to co-sign on this type of behavior because you are feeding into it essentially to some degree. Every time you allow them to get away with this behavior, it perpetuates it a little bit longer. And so it is good for these people to also have boundaries set for them because they should not be doing these things. And again, sometimes they weaponize your empathy and do the whole guilt trip of, you're hurting me. This is actually a really common one. Sometimes when people confront their parents or family members, or maybe even partners about problematic behaviors, and they're just like, well, I guess I'm just a terrible mother. I guess I can't do anything right. I guess I'm just like the worst. And they try to make the person who's trying to work on something all of a sudden like you're the bully, even if they were doing something really abusive or problematic. So you can kind of get trapped in with these people. Some of these people will even, again, getting into the kind of the narcissistic example, will even maybe blackmail you, threaten you. A lot of types of abuse. Again, like what is abuse? A lot of times it's people like using you for something, even if they're just talking down to you to make themselves feel superior. They're still essentially like stepping on you to boost themselves. Okay. So you really do need to set boundaries with these people. You are allowed to set boundaries with these people, even if they don't like it, or even if it makes you uncomfortable. So here's a few ways to set boundaries with people. Now, again, if you're in like a really intense, maybe abusive relationship, some of these things might not exactly apply. In that case, seek out resources for intimate partner violence or domestic violence. Even if it's emotional abuse, whatever, that counts. So some of these are more of like how to casually deflect or put boundaries around your energy and your time and your attention with the kind of casual energy vampires in your life. So these might be people at work, or I don't know, certain friends or whatever, where it's a little bit easier. So we're going to start there of like first the low hanging fruit. We're going to just pick these things off and okay, I need less interaction with this person. So again, for example, I once had a coworker who was very much an energy vampire, and if I let them, would stand at my desk for 8 hours and just vent and I don't know, distract me from my work, right? So I found all these ways to say directly that I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. I tried all the other ways of like, oh, let me put the headphones in, let me give all the nonverbal cues. A lot of times energy vampires don't care. They're there to get their fix. But whatever it takes to say, hey, listen, Like, I need to focus. And so that's kind of an indirect approach in terms of like, I'm not saying anything about you. This is just what I'm doing right now. And that's what I'm going to do it. And then you do it, you follow through. Second, a little bit more straightforward is, again, this one, like I have a goal of chatting less. And so this is not productive, but you can also even say, listen, I can't have you approaching me like this every single day. This is really distracting. Like, I need you to stop doing this. That takes a little bit more courage if you're kind of a people pleaser or someone who hates conflict. That might be scary for you, but it's also really empowering and really freeing when you do it. And then finally, there's some people that you really do need to cut off for maybe a while, maybe forever, especially when it comes to friendships, certain connections. I think friendships really are meant to be recreational, in my opinion. It's meant to be mostly good and mostly supportive, even if you guys are going through hard stuff together or whatever, that you're feeding back into each other reciprocally. And if there's anyone who's just causing more trouble in your life, that's a friend, they need to go. Now, when it comes to family, it's a bit more complicated. A lot of times I don't recommend a hard cutoff to your family of origin unless there's some really toxic, really abusive stuff going on. Then absolutely do whatever you need to do. But sometimes, with maybe parents or siblings or family members where you're like, oof, I love them. I want to stay connected in some ways, but small doses. And so I'm going to be really specific about how much time I spend with them and having an easy exit plan, and, maybe even setting boundaries about what we're allowed to talk about. If there's certain things that are like, this gets into a really unhealthy, toxic place when we talk about this thing. So I'm setting a boundary on that. We're not talking about that, right? Whatever you need to do, but you do need to be direct. You do need to tell people what you want, and you need to prioritize what you want, and you're allowed to. And we'll get into the mindset piece of this, because honestly, yes, there are boundary pushers and really abusive people that really do just bulldoze your boundaries. And that's kind of, again, a whole other category of dealing with like highly abusive people. That's a whole other presentation. This is more of just like the casual interactions that we have. If you just tend to be overly polite, essentially, which is what a lot of people pleasers are. It's like, I'm just being polite. I'm trying to be accommodating. But if you're finding yourself really drained or just not feeling good by the interaction, you are allowed to take up space, to express yourself honestly, to prioritize your own needs. You are allowed to do that, and you should do that for your own health and your own impact in life. But these are some of the mindset shifts that I like for people to get into, just to help you in your mind kind of justify why you're doing what you're doing and to hold the boundary. Because for certain people who are a bit of boundary pushers, they might push back on you. They might want to argue with your boundary or make you feel a little guilty, call you out or whatever, or sulk or pout, all these things that might make you want to just cave on the boundary, take the boundary back just to get the peace again, which is, it's really manipulative when people do that. So this is not a healthy thing for you to be doing. So I like for people to ask these questions when they're trying to kind of justify to themselves of like, yes, I need to set the boundary. I need to stick to it. So there's a handful here. We have such a short life. Like, why would we spend time with people who just bring us down, especially if you have big goals and you're trying to climb to the top of whatever your metaphorical mountain is? Like, we do not need a lot of heavy weight. We need to take some of the rocks out of our bags that are just like weighing us down so that we can go on right up, right? And especially if you're spending time with someone who you feel very compassionate for, there are some people that kind of evoke almost like a pity level of compassion or empathy, where you're just like, oh my gosh, they're just going through it. But some of those people, in terms of a codependent relationship, again, they might be very sweet people, or like, people that really haven't quite found their own footing, their own confidence yet. They might have some mental health struggles, some self-esteem issues that they really need to work on in therapy. And they might be relying on you to, I guess, if we're going with the mountain metaphor, they're almost expecting you to like strap them to your back and hike them up that mountain versus them walking up the mountain. And my goal for everyone in any of your relationships is like, yes, you can support each other. You can be interdependent in some ways, reciprocally, where maybe you are hiking up the mountain together and you're passing water back and forth and you're talking, you're whatever, and you're encouraging each other, but you're each on your own feet as you walk up the mountain. Versus there are some relationships or even client relationships, like in your professional work, where you are doing so much more of the work that it is like you are dragging this person up to the top of this mountain, which is so exhausting. But also it's something that that person, if you get them to the top of the mountain, like you both are like, yay, we're here, this is amazing. And they might get really excited about it. And sometimes you might even feel some resentment because they're like celebrating. You're like, but wait, I dragged you up here. Like, I actually did this. I should be double celebrating. That's beside the point though. But like, if you do the work for someone else, the whole thing is that they can't replicate that. If they didn't build the muscles to climb up to the mountain themselves, they're never going to be able to do it again unless you're the one to drag them up again. So it's not really helping them. And sometimes when you pull back some of your overgiving in these kind of codependent relationships, which are also really common, by the way, in partnerships, marriages, whatever, it can be actually in general a really wonderful supportive relationship, but still there's one overfunctioner and one underfunctioner. It's very common. And again, over time, it can like really deteriorate the relationship, but also as that one person underfunctions over time, not only are you getting more and more tired, it kind of entrenches their belief that they can't fully function the way maybe that you can or other people can. It kind of like entrenches this belief that they're less than. So it's actually not good for them. And sometimes when you pull back and make them step up to the plate, causes anxiety, they're out of their comfort zone, maybe they're a little grouchy about it, but as they successfully do the things that they need to do, a lot of times they get really empowered and their life starts to take off and change. I've seen this happen in so many relationships and it's really beautiful to watch. So sometimes setting these difficult boundaries, having the hard conversations in the long run pays off hugely, both for you, but also that person, and then creates a healthier relationship. So sometimes the drain is actually also someone you love deeply and you're like, I need to set the boundaries so that they have to step up more, and then we can have that reciprocal relationship. So sometimes when you're setting boundaries, some people will not respect them, they have to drop off, and other people who are really invested in you but maybe have some healing to do, they'll say, all right, I'm going to work on this, or we'll work on it together. And it is possible to go from a codependent relationship or non-reciprocal relationship to a reciprocal one. Again, I've seen it happen all the time. And again, I always like to tell people, you know, when you set boundaries, a lot of times people don't like it, because if they're used to a pattern of behavior where you're overgiving and all of a sudden you stop overgiving, they're like, what the heck? You cut off my supply. They might even accuse you of abandoning them or being selfish or all these things, when honestly, a lot of times, again, if there's someone who's under functioning, like say this is the middle line, here's my screen, here's the middle line, like reciprocal relationships, we're supposed to meet here. Maybe they're, you know, over here and you've had to keep going over, like, okay, I'm doing 75% of the work and you're doing 25% of the work, whether it's in the relationship or our household chores or in the office as coworkers or whatever. It could be any kind of relationship, parent, child, siblings, whatever. You know when you're the one who's overgiving, right? But sometimes when you're like, okay, I need to be healthier, so I'm going to actually back up to the midline. Like, this is the healthy boundary, I'm going to actually back up here. Sometimes this person is like, you've left me, you've abandoned me. They're acting like you went over here, but you didn't. You just stepped back to a healthy middle line. So a lot of times you can expect people to have a reaction to your boundaries, especially if it affects them. If they were getting resources or benefits off of you overgiving, then I don't know, nobody wants to like lose their perks, right? They're going to be like disappointed, maybe frustrated, maybe angry, maybe anxious because you were doing something for them and now they have to do it for themselves. Oh, but again, when you keep overgiving, you're robbing that person of their own growth journey and their own opportunity to figure things out on their own. So it's just really important for you to set the boundaries and allow them to flounder a little bit too. Allow them to figure it out. Allow them to be a little mad at you. It's not your job to fix their mood, because a lot of times the only way you can fix their mood is to go back on your boundary, and that's not what we're doing here. So I know I could talk about this forever. If this is something that's resonating with you, if you're like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking of so many relationships and I need to work on them, shoot me a message. Actually, let's I'll give you my contact information. I love DMing people on social media. I have multiple social media channels that I'm fairly active on, so you're always welcome to connect with me there. I have more tips on all of these things about boundaries and people pleasing, amongst all the other topics I talk about in terms of creating an easeful, joyful, impactful, healthy life. But if you really want to do this deep inner work, I have a handful of options for you. You can always reach out to me to talk about doing one-on-one coaching. That can be really, really helpful, especially when you're setting hard boundaries with really significant relationships. Sometimes it's the hardest to set these boundaries with like our spouse or a parent, basically someone we love deeply, but who's harming us in some way or siphoning our energy in some way. And we want them there, but we need all the support that we can get to move forward. So that is something that I absolutely work on with people. I also work on just de-stressing, managing your energy, accepting yourself as a highly sensitive person and knowing that you need to make accommodations for yourself. We get into all that kind of stuff one-on-one. And I also have a group membership that is actually a whole group of like-minded women all doing the same thing. We have 2 coaching calls a week. It's called the Easeful Up Level. So we just get into all things life, business, relationships, self-care. It's just an amazing safe space for other givers and other lights in this world. Like basically it's a whole group of radiators essentially that all come together to support each other. It is at this point women only, but it is just this amazing kind of container for you to get lots and lots of support. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely go check out my website. Also, you can email me or sign up to my newsletters and get more information, but I would love to just support you in any way that I can, whether you work with me individually or come into the group, or maybe we'll never meet. DM me if you need resources, if you need anything, if there's any topic you ever want me to riff on, I'm happy to send you more resources here. So just wanting to support people feeling better, because the givers and the leaders of this world need so much support, because we need your light, we need your love, we need your innovation. We need people like you at the top. We need people like you to lead, to undo all of the many ills of this world. So I hope you stick around. I hope we meet at some point. But if not, go set a boundary today and have a wonderful rest of your week.